Hello again. I must apologise for my apparent radio silence lately. This has been caused by events over which I have no control, such as connection to the internet and so on. I was thinking this morning about the way in which we all like to have somebody to blame for the things in our lives which annoy us. Sometimes these scapegoats are people like prime ministers and presidents, and we curse them for their mismanagement of our country's affairs. That's reasonable because they are, after all, supposed to be running things. At other times, we cast around further afield for people who might be responsible for what we dislike or of which we disapprove. We look at officials in charge of the European Union or Vladimir Putin, say, and we can castigate them harshly for the supposed influence which they have on what we see going on in the world that we dislike. At other times, we fix upon more obscure figures, people completely unknown to the world at large, but whom we feel have a greater malign influence upon our lives, even if they happen to be dead. Ideally, such people should have strange foreign names, and if they happen to be Jewish, then so much the better. In this way, unknown academics, for example, whose only claim to fame has been teaching philosophy, are raised to the status of villains from a James Bond film. Sometimes they even have names which remind us of the baddies from spy films. Spectre, for instance. This is part of the reason, I think, why Barbara Lerner Spectre, an American woman who has tried to revive Jewish culture in Europe, has been cast as the evil mastermind directing the destruction of European civilization. I suspect that many viewers will not have heard of Barbara Lerner Spectre, but she is right up there with Richard Kudnow-Kalergi, another of those villains of whom the average normal person has never heard, as somebody intent upon the destruction of European civilization and culture by means of opening up the continent to barbarian hordes from the east and south. What is Spectre's role in all this, you ask? I'm guessing that most viewers won't even know who I'm talking about here, although they might have seen the odd mention of her in comments by certain people to videos I've made about immigration. Briefly, she's an 80-year-old Jewish woman who was born in the United States and studied philosophy at university. She married a rabbi, and then in 67, the year of the Six-Day War, they made their way to Israel. They made Aliyah, that's to say that they went to live in Israel permanently. She taught philosophy there, and then in 1999 they both moved to Sweden, where her husband became rabbi of the synagogue there. By this point, I expect some of you are scratching your heads and saying to yourself, well, that's all very interesting, but what has this wretched old woman got to do with us? Why is he banging on about her? The answer is that a certain number of people feel that this academic in Sweden is the ideological mastermind behind mass immigration to Europe in recent years. It's quite mad, but there it is. I'm strongly opposed to immigration to Europe from Africa and Asia, but blaming some innocuous old woman and persuading ourselves if we can only deal with her influence, then the problem will be solved is insane, and it won't help us to halt immigration at all. Why is Spectre blamed for immigration? In 2000, after moving to Sweden, she persuaded the government there to fund a project which she set up, the European Institute for Jewish Studies in Sweden. The aim of this was to revive Jewish culture in Europe. Because she became fairly well known in the years following this, newspapers began to ask her opinions about not only Jewish culture but a host of other things, and she began to feel that she was an important person, somebody whose views and opinions everyone would love to hear. So she started expressing what she thought was her sensible views about immigration to Europe. she is in favour of it from all over the place. Of course, she's just one barely known academic running a charity in Sweden and has not the slightest effect on the immigration policy of any country in the world. And nobody in the real normal world has even heard of her. However, partly because she's Jewish, and partly, I suspect, because her name is Spectre, redolent of James Bond films, she has been adopted by various people who believe in a certain type of conspiracy theory and is used as their figurehead or poster girl. It is claimed that she is at the head of an international conspiracy to flood Europe with people from Africa and Asia. The reason I disapprove of this kind of lunacy is because it prevents us from really working to halt immigration, both to Britain and the rest of Europe. Barbara Spectre has literally no influence on any government's policy anywhere, no matter what foolish and ill-judged things she might say. She's a nobody. Spectre may be seen in the thumbnail to this video.